third member to this panel. I'll give a brief introduction to Evan Jahn, who is of Jahn Studio. Evan understands the ability of technical architecture to be an effective way of meeting sustainability imperatives while enhancing urban and built environment experiences. Evan joined Jahn in 2020 as a VP and took over leadership of the firm in 2021. And then moderating our panel is our purveyor of this establishment, Cyclone founder and president, Benny Skelton.
Thank you, Dave. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your great presentations. And Evan, thanks for joining. We don't do fireside chats at a rodeo. We do fire pit chats. So we're not really a panel discussion, but that is the format. But wanted to give it...
Reclaimed timber, too.
It is reclaimed timber, absolutely. Why don't you actually kick us off? You haven't had a chance to really introduce yourself, so...
Thanks for the opportunity. Can everybody hear me? Evan Jahn, president of Jahn Architecture, and I took over following my father's unfortunate death, but I joined the firm about a year and a half before that. I came from more the green building side. Actually, that's my background, and I really joined the firm with the idea of enhancing more of the sustainability focus, and that rapidly changed to running the firm. And green building and high performance building, I should say, buildings have always been a focus of the firm.
Great, and sorry about your father's death, and glad you're doing well with the business now. And
thanks.
That's one reason I wanted to have Evan on the panel here, is because he brings a different perspective. You know, we have an architect that works in the design, we have an organizational person that works with the end user, and then we have someone that works both in the design and the construction aspects of it. We have a pretty big perspective on how embodied carbon plays into the different facets of the built environment here. So, with that, I go maybe to Erika here and follow up. Your presentation was pretty interesting. You guys were talking about some policy things coming out, and I saw Andrea had some policy things. How rapidly developing are these? Are they something that is going to just be city by city, state by state? Is there a national potential for anything?
I think I'm still on. I would say you're going to see more embodied carbon in the bigger cities that probably have the maybe design infrastructure to support it. I would say in Kansas City, we have been really happy to have passed the 2021 Energy Code, although it was a process. And so I haven't heard any appetite in KC yet for embodied carbon, but I will say it's been interesting to watch just the last 4 or 5 years how fast it's grown. So we probably wouldn't be like bleeding edge, but we would probably be in that middle tier of cities, I would think. But yeah, it is interesting to see how fast just kind of the awareness of it has started to grow.
And Andrea, you probably get involved in that too. So you're working with policymakers. You said you're reactive, but I'm assuming that do they come to you for insights given your work with the end user?
It's a little bit of both. There have been some coalitions that we've helped form and been able to join, and others that we're more reactive to. I would say for policy, our biggest clients are assuming that there's going to be more city, state, or national legislation. And from a risk management standpoint, they are moving to mass timber. They are moving at a huge scale to low embodied concrete. They're anticipating that the buildings that are starting to be designed now but might not be occupied for 7 to 10 years are going to be held to a completely different legislative landscape than exists today. And they're adapting, kind of like going all in and reducing embodied carbon as much as they can.
Evan, in your practice, how are you seeing embodied carbon?
Well, as an international firm, it's definitely more of a directive from our European and international clients. They seem to be more focused and concerned on it. It's definitely raised up the priority level in discussions around overall concepts and design, whereas here it's more of, well, we have to, right? And I think so. It's a little bit of stick, driven in Europe, but also there's a greater societal interest and they're held to, I think, a little bit more criticalness and higher standard there. So it's definitely elevated within the decision matrix.
Have you, I heard, Andrea talking about mass timber and things of that nature. How have you seen that come into your work here?
For us, it's really been a little bit of exploration. It hasn't been something that we've been able to execute yet. We've mainly really explored it as a solution to adaptive reuse, actually, of using it as lightweight construction over existing structures. But there's a lot of potential. I think it obviously depends on where the project is located, the lease span of what you're really looking to achieve in the design, if it is a residential or commercial building. The firm has actually done one mass timber, but it was actually a little bit of a pet project that we did out at our family farm. We designed a mass timber riding studio.
Sounds pretty cool. Erika, Clayco, have you been involved in any?
I was involved in one mass timber project in Kansas City before I joined Clayco, which is for the Overland Park Arboretum, which was a really cool project. But we've had more of our industrial clients looking at it, essentially saying, okay, we're going to have this big warehouse, but we want the office portion to be mass timber. We've also had some people say we want the building like essentially not having tilt wall on the outside, having steel columns, but then clad in CLT. So we've been looking at those options. I would say, like, just as a structural engineer, I think mass timber is an awesome option. I feel like I'm closing in on this mic here. I would say it can be an extremely awesome low carbon option as long as you are diligent about the sourcing of it. So as long as you track those certificates of the chain of custody, I would say not all timber is created equal. So you have to be diligent about it, but it can be a great option. It also, 80, 90-foot spans like you would see here, you're probably going to double your columns with mass timber, right? It doesn't go as far, but as long as you go in knowing those things, it can be, and go in knowing that you're probably going to need a few more columns, and that, hey, I'm really going to have to stick to getting these certifications, and then it's an awesome option.
Andrea, I saw on your slide there that 3 of your volume programs are people like Amazon and Prologis and JLL, who all work in really large commercial and industrial buildings. That's something we work a lot in, with industrial, particularly with Clayco. What are you seeing from them as far as, is this just reporting? Are they making changes to their designs?
They're definitely making changes to their designs. I would say Amazon doesn't get enough credit for how much money they put into the research side of embodied carbon related things. They've done a lot of work around carbon offsets, around forest management and reforestation. Prologis has done a lot of work with just material experimentation in different parts of the world. And JLL, we haven't worked with them as much on the buildings that they are managing. It's more how they can support their clients, these big things. And they're definitely doing major shifts and putting a lot of money into it. It's not just about reporting. I think they start with reporting, but we're actually seeing a big shift of a lot of the big consulting firms. Their top tier talent is being scooped up by a lot of these big companies pretty quickly. And their shift is not in reporting, it's to gain that knowledge in-house.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, Andrea. And Erika, are these clients driving some of the research that Clayco's doing?
Yeah, I would say, of our work in our sustainability group at Clayco, I would say 50% of it is we want to achieve LEED or this third-party certification, and 50% of it is not associated with third-party certification, but with an owner-driven spec that says we want X, Y, Z. So yeah, we have seen real leadership from the Amazons and the AWSs of the world really pushing and holding us to those carbon limits. So it's been refreshing to see.
Evan, when it goes to a developer or someone coming to you to build a building, have you seen or do you foresee that this is going to be something that they're going to bring up? Is an adaptive reuse going to be a better option for someone than a new glass and concrete building?
I think the best buildings, or let's call it the most ecological buildings, are the ones that you don't have to build with virgin materials, completely from scratch. So I think that that's, a lot of the story going, prevailing now is that this adaptive reuse, we have all this square footage out there. How can we retrofit it to adapt to the needs of today's commercial markets, whether it be residential or commercial office or mixed use? And, right now we have two of our biggest projects being repositionings of major buildings, 1 million square feet in aggregate for each of the projects. And one is in Germany, in Berlin, the Sony Center, which is a collection of 8 buildings that comprise a little over 1 million square feet, representing a triangular whole city block there. And we're working with Oxford out of Canada, who's the main owner of the asset, who then also has a partner, which is Norges Investment Bank. Norges and Oxford both have, I'd say, aggressive ESG standards, and everything that we propose sort of goes through that extra lens of, well, how is this meeting our ESG criteria? How does it reduce our operating costs? How does it reduce our sourcing embodied carbon of the materials? And so we're usually working with consultants to assess that because we're a relatively small firm. We don't have all of those capabilities in-house, but we've worked for many years with top-tier consultants on this. And so, what it always ends up being as an interesting study on, wow, I didn't realize how much actually just sort of selective demolition and this idea of how much we can still save reduces the overall embodied carbon, right? And then when we say, okay, yeah, this 20 or 25-year-old mechanical system, you're going to get a huge benefit from upgrading that to a radiant system or something, or radiant panels or whatnot. But then when we say, okay, well, we don't need to replace all this glazing. Actually, you're not going to get as much of a benefit as you think from that. What if we'd actually just put some additional shading on the exterior? Stuff like that. So those are types of investigations that we're doing with clients. And on a big project here with the Thompson Center, we're working with a very sophisticated multinational client that has, maybe somebody's heard of it, Google.
Should you Google it?
Yep. And it's really interesting because for us to work with a client that has all this in-house expertise, and how that's very exciting, but at the same time it creates all these competing priorities of who's really got the non-negotiable here, right? And it really becomes an interesting puzzle to figure out when you're looking at what is the energy performance, what is the interior well-being, and what is the ecological priorities, and then there's group on top of that, security and so forth, and all the other ones. But it's just it's another layer in an already complicated and very sophisticated design process. But I think it's obvious, it's very necessary, but it is one that I think we're realizing, how do we really address at the right times, and how do people who aren't so familiar come to grips with, okay, these are considerations which you have to take more seriously now than you did 10, 15 years ago.
I think, that thought of repositioning an existing building to not only save the embodied carbon, but now we're looking at things like Illinois Green was talking about with building performance standards and codes that are making you reduce your operational carbon in a building that's existing. And, that kind of brings up the question, how are you going to do that with a building? There's limitations to HVAC systems and efficiencies. So, Erika, are you seeing materials come out for things like this that are in an adaptive reuse or in a reconstruction process where, what materials are Clayco seeing besides concrete? And
Yeah. Well, I guess for adaptive reuse, you obviously have an easier time going in with steel to build over or above or around something. You can look at mass timber, like you mentioned, it's lighter weight. I guess just from the retrofit side, we've been pricing out. We talk to our clients a lot about future proofing their buildings, right? So even if you're not, and this might very well be part of the Illinois code, and so maybe everybody is already on top of it, but maybe you're not ready to pull the trigger on some solar panels yet, but let's make sure your roof is designed for it, right? I'm not sure if there's a specific material. There are, I guess there are higher grades of steel, if you need a stronger steel. And then you can look at different types of if it's in a corrosive environment or something, different types of coating. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered.
Andrea, how does the ILFI look at materials like this?
I have a whole pedal for it.
Critically.
I think new materials are always a question mark because it's not just, you mean resources materials, correct? Because it's not just about the embodied carbon. There's also the human health aspects to it as well. Whether it's FSC or SFI, if it's wood related. So I think we're starting to see mindful materials is a great database paired with EC3. I think we're seeing more and more databases with the manufacturer reported information coming up with the intent of making it easier for designers to really quickly understand the materials that they're selecting and specifying and put the relevant information into their analysis tools.
I guess I did think of one other, because our company in St. Louis is moving into a new headquarters, and so there are some really innovative low carbon concrete mixes out there. Algae based and whatever else, and we're piloting them, but in non-structural ways. We're going to use them for stair pans, right? So sometimes you can pilot these things in non-critical ways.
That makes sense. And Evan, what do you kind of foresee in the future for materials and buildings to get? The codes are getting so restrictive. Most places we can't build a building with more than 40% glass. I think you probably struggle with that on some of the projects that you work on. What's it going to take to kind of meet the code? To make these buildings comply going forward.
Yeah. So there's two parts to that, I think, which is how do you satisfy code? And then how do you satisfy actually what our client or the market's desire is, right? The market still desires as much vision glass as possible. There's select clients that understand, okay, we're going to have to make a compromise. We can't have as much glass as we've traditionally seen in commercial office buildings. But there's still a lot of advancement that's going to happen in glass technology in my perspective. And just overall sort of enclosure technology, I think, is going to still even get greater, just like it did in the 80s when again, sort of the market wanted more glass, and we were coming out of actually building more buildings with more opaque area. And then it was seen, okay, well, we have to put more lights in these buildings that don't have as much daylight. I don't have to retell the story, but essentially, we migrated to a better solution, which is more daylight, less additional light. But now we're at such high efficiencies with our interior fixtures that daylight is not as necessary from an energy performance, but from a wellness and interior health, it's very much desired, right? So, long way of answering this is like, I think glass and insulation technology and just overall enclosure technology. So, you know, what you're seeing, or what we're seeing is aerogels going from being opaque insulation to being clear laminates that can be applied to new glass units, or, you know, even better yet, which is retrofit. But there's so many opportunities to increase the envelope efficiencies of these older buildings as they're being repositioned.
Well, I don't want to lasso these three up with all the questions. So I know we had two presentations already. Does anybody have a question in the audience here? I'll start with you, Emily. Wait.
All right, I guess mostly a question for Erika, but hopefully y'all have some good insight as well. Yeah, I'm really excited to see all this new policy and legislation coming out around embodied carbon. Katie and Brian spoke earlier about the importance of having building professionals engage with lawmakers about some of these policies to make sure that they not only, you know, get passed, but also work for the industry.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight on like what has worked in getting some of those regulations on the books, and like how to even make something this technical legible to lawmakers?
So yeah, our, and I cannot take the credit for this, it's some of my fellow board members in Kansas City, but they were very active in getting the 2021 Energy Code passed in Kansas City. So, but we have found, because, you know, Kansas City straddles Kansas and Missouri, we have really found that, yes, the city council people love to meet with architects and engineers to give them more knowledge about how to speak to some of these things. So yeah, we have a session at Green Build this year on some of the things that our chapter this is like really, I can't believe you gave me that softball question, because we had like
Your
this
panel at Green
amazing
Build.
session. We have a session at Green Build this year of some of the things that our board has done with the local council people to work and get some more of the green legislation passed. So it is intimidating to think about going and talking to your local council person, but you know, we've had success about it. You know, and particularly working to dispel some of the different cost myths and things like that out there. So yeah, go make friends with your council people for sure. Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm curious if the three of you have seen examples of dematerialization in buildings, whether it's right-sizing building systems or optimizing enclosure systems based on performance and embodied carbon.
I'm happy to answer that. So from a quantitative embodied carbon standpoint, no, right? From like actually using it in sort of modern carbon calculations. But we've been, as a firm, dealing with this dematerialization through sort of what we call intelligent system building systems, right? Is the interrelationship between the facade, the structure, and the mechanical systems. How do you optimize the cores for the program of the building so that you're not building additional, you know, space that has to be heated, cooled, lit? And how can you organize offices and layouts to maximize daylight, to bring the opportunity for fresh air, all these things. And you know, when you look at it from a holistic system standpoint, that's where you really start to see, oh, we don't need that, right?
And another question, anybody? Jahn?
I've been hearing about the materials like carbon cure, carbon sink. So do they get into account? How does that square with embodied carbon? Is there a balance, or does it make sense to consider materials that actually capture or carbon? Way to just capture it and keep it from back into the environment.
speak to
Sequestration?
that, or yeah. So yeah, carbon cure is taken into account in an EPD if you get it. So we have one large producer in my area that has carbon cure. In my experience, it can reduce the carbon maybe 5 to 8% ish, like not a huge amount. Whereas some of those other taking cement out and putting in fly ash or slag or whatever, you can get more like 20-30%, but it is a valid technique. And so it's one thing that you can kind of stack as a strategy, layered strategy. There's definitely, materials like timber and things where people do include sequestration as part of that calculation. A lot of the EPDs that are out there right now, most of them that I see are only that A1 through A3, and I feel like people are still coalescing maybe around the right way to calculate the sequestration. But I know there are a couple different methods out there. So when we have done case studies, we are very explicit to the legal presentation earlier. We will say this number includes sequestration or it doesn't, and here's the methodology that we used. So that's been my experience.
All right, thank you. I think we're at our time here, so any other questions we can maybe take after the session here shortly. But thank you, Evan, Andrea, Erika, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Benny.